Greetings. I'm William Leach, an affordable housing developer by trade and a housing advocate at heart. This presentation intends to outline the process for building a new TCAC 9% tiebreaker from scratch. While it bears my name, it is really the culmination of input from 20 plus industry practitioners. At a glance, the process starts with deciding the tiebreaker's overall objective and determining the best way to measure success. Then it requires listing all of the undesired consequences and deciding which of those should be offset in some way. In step 5, we determine the most effective ways to adjust the tiebreaker to level the playing field, whereas step 6 entails crafting a defensible adjustment to address each issue. Lastly, we publish the methodology and plans for its implementation. What should the primary objective of the 9% tax credit program's tiebreaker be? I considered a number of options. Inducing local investments is the aim of our current tiebreaker, and there's been discussion for a few years about lowering the cost per unit. But I believe the tiebreaker should aim to maximize the public benefit derived with our scarce resources. How then should we measure public benefit? The current tiebreaker measures how much soft money is committed to the project. And some argue that the amount of bedrooms we produce is the best measure. But I believe the most understandable measure is how many low-income units we produce with our tax credits. If units is the best measure of return and credits is what we invest, the fundamental calculation should be units divided by credits. I like to state credits in millions to make the math easy and the score a meaningful expression. Consider this first example where the application proposes 60 units and requests 12 million credits. Their score would be 5 units per million. In this second example, the application proposes 50 units and requests 11 million credits. Their score would be worse, 4.5 units per million. The blue example, having the higher score and providing the better return on investment, would win the tiebreaker. This fundamental metric, units divided by credits, is understandable, motivational, and yet it's flawed. There are two types of undesired consequences that will result from such a production-oriented tiebreaker. First, certain public benefits like locating units in opportunity areas is not captured in the amount of units and would therefore be completely ignored. Second, certain project characteristics like selecting the family housing type, which increases the need for tax credits, it would put such projects at a disadvantage. While I fully believe in using units divided by credits as the fundamental measure, we must account for added public benefit, and we must level the playing field for projects that need more or less credits for feasibility. Therefore, the next step in the process is for the industry to list the natural consequences of a production-oriented tiebreaker. This slide gives an example of consequences that would likely make the list. Once the list has been created and the issues researched, the policymakers must decide which issues to adjust the tiebreaker for. In this example, let's pretend the committee doesn't feel the need to incentivize environmental benefits beyond the sustainability point category. But it does want to incent family projects in high opportunity areas. Let's also imagine they decide that local benefits like spurring development or extending infrastructure, they need not be addressed. And while they aren't persuaded that special developers provide added benefit, they do want to recognize that committing to funding 15 years of supportive services should not disadvantage a project. On the need for credits side, Let's imagine the committee desires to level the playing field for location, new construction compared to rehab, projects that must pay prevailing wages, and family projects that include more square footage. Yet the committee doesn't choose to level the playing field for all development characteristics, thereby leaving inefficient developers at a disadvantage. Regardless of which issues the committee chooses to adjust the tiebreaker to address, we need to decide how those adjustments will interact with our calculation, units divided by credits. After considering many options, proposing a number of methods, and receiving lots of feedback, I've settled on two simple tools. First, we can multiply the numerator by a percentage, above or below 100%, to amplify or worsen the score. This adjustment simulates the assumption that every unit is better off by the added public benefit. Take family projects in opportunity areas. Some might argue that every unit is producing 10% more public benefit, and therefore 50 units in such areas are worth the same as 55 units elsewhere. Second, we can add or subtract justifiable cost differences in the denominator. Let's pretend that historic data indicates that prevailing wages increases costs by $40,000 per unit, which by the way is a made-up number. A 50-unit project with prevailing wages will then have $2 million in additional costs and thus need $2 million more credits. Because of the incremental nature of the project characteristic, multipliers will not work, but addition will. Now for the fun part. Every undesired consequence the committee decides to address will need an adjuster crafted for it. The way to craft adjusters entails a process in itself. In brief, the process entails researching historic differences in cost and quantifying perceived differences in benefits. Next, the committee must decide whether to neutralize the difference, only partially offset it, or weight the adjuster to incentivize the characteristic. Once the strength of the adjuster is decided, we need to see if a ceiling or a floor is needed to prevent motivating extreme behaviors like 5-bedroom units. Lastly, the adjuster needs to be tested individually and collectively to ensure it motivates good behavior without forcing cookie-cutter projects. After much research, discussion, and deliberation, we will come up with a tiebreaker of units divided by credits with a handful of well-crafted adjusters that level the playing field. The tiebreaker would be added to the regulations with a delayed implementation. The industry would be provided an Excel model showing how the score is calculated. And the industry could hold workshops helping developers brainstorm how to maximize their score. Admittedly, this is an arduous process. As an example, it has taken me hundreds of hours over the past year to research, communicate, and refine my proposal, which only serves as a starting point. But even if it takes great policy minds 10,000 hours to develop, the benefits will far outweigh the cost. The resulting tiebreaker will produce more units with no additional resources. It will challenge developers, lenders, investors, cities, and every consultant involved to stretch our resources. It will produce innovation. It will be easy to police, easy to adjust, and easy to explain. I pray this presentation gives you confidence that we can create a better tiebreaker for Californians. God bless.